I'm going to borrow a page from Stephen Covey and start with the end in mind. I'll give you the conclusion first. Wisdom requires openness. Wisdom requires openness to possibilities, to perspectives, to people. So just hang on to that. And if you want to just sleep on it, go right ahead. Go right. Those who study argument and debate are familiar with something called the false choice fallacy. The false choice fallacy is a corruption, a manipulation of logic, where you take a complex issue and strip it of its nuances and complexities and boil it down to its simplest terms in a way that divides people where they have to take sides against each other. We see it all the time. It creates a no-win situation for your opponent if you can get them to commit to one side or the other. We see it all the time in our public debate. It's constant. The talking heads on the news love to try to spin it that way. It's a favorite mantra of the gun lobby right now, where they've taken a complex issue and they want to boil it down into two camps. Either we need to allow anyone and everyone to carry any gun into any place at any time, or we have to let the government come and take away Grandpa's deer hunting rifle. And it's just a wedge that you have to go one way or the other. It was also a favorite technique of the Pharisees. They loved this. They tried to trap Jesus all the time with it. Get him to commit. Of course, he never took the bait. They confronted him with the woman caught in adultery. Well, the law says we should stone her to death. So, are you going to follow the law and stone her to death? Or are you going to tell us that the law doesn't matter, we should dismiss it? It's false choice fallacy. Of course, Jesus gives them a different response. Those, whoever's without sin can cast the stone. Bigger picture on it. So with that, let's look at the story arc of the last few weeks that brings us to today. I think that helps us understand why we get this parable. 3 weeks ago, the Pharisees approach him. Of course, they always want confrontation, and Jesus just wants conversation. But they approach him with the issue of taxes, remember? And they said, so, should we pay our taxes or not? If Jesus says, yeah, pay the taxes, he's capitulating to Rome and loses all credibility with the Jews. If he says, don't pay the taxes, he's now a rebel and will be put to death. False choice. And of course he says, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. And in doing so, he gives us a bigger truth that encompasses a lot more, and there's room underneath it. Then 2 weeks ago, they confront him again and try to set up a false choice. Which is the greatest commandment, Jesus? Which is it? And if they can get him to bite, to pick one, then they can chisel away at him until he comes out and says, well, maybe some aren't as important as others. And of course, he won't take that bait either, so he tells them and tells us, love God with your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's the greatest commandment. All the others fit underneath it. It's the larger truth. This was exhausting for him. They were constantly hitting him up and trying to pin him into a corner. And last week we finally heard him get a little frustrated with it, right? And he says to the people, listen, pay attention to what the Pharisees say. Listen to them, because that's what the wisdom of an open mind does. It listens to all voices. So listen to them. But don't do what they do. Don't get involved in that game of just stripping the nuance and the complexity out of things and trying to simplify issues to a point where they divide people. Don't get involved in that. Look for the bigger truth. Don't do that. Well, you can imagine that in him telling everyone not to do what the Pharisees do, he probably raised a few eyebrows. So today he needs to explain himself. And he gives us this absolutely delightful parable of these 10 bridesmaids, we sometimes call them, but virgins the scripture calls them, that go out to meet the groom who's returning. So let's just look at that culture to understand it a bit. The word virgins is a little misleading. It's from a Greek term that can be translated a few different ways, and most scholars believe that in this case it would be best to translate it as young maidens. Well, young maidens. The cultural scholar, John Pilch, says we should think of them as teenagers. They're just teenagers. But I think if you take all of the scholarship that's done behind this parable and the language, we can understand that what we're talking about here are 10 6th and 7th grade girls. That's really what, they're 12, 13 years old. They're too young to get married, and people at that time got married 14, 15 years old. So they're 12, 13-year-old girls. They've come from the groom's home. They're part of his household. Probably younger sisters, perhaps some nieces. But they're excited because today he's returning. Their brother, their uncle, has gone off to a neighboring village to get his bride. And there's going to be some dowry negotiations. We're not sure exactly how long that'll take, but today's the day. Today's the day he's coming back. Now, if you've ever been around 6th and 7th grade girls, it can be a little dramatic, excitable, high energy. They're pretty wound up. Today's the day. There's going to be a big party, a big feast. He's coming home with his new bride. We cannot wait. So they pack a lunch and they head out together to meet him. And they wait for him. And they wait. And they wait. And he's flying Delta. And he's delayed. And he's not coming. And the day gets long. And it grows into evening. And evening grows into night. Gets dark. They fall asleep. If he's not coming today, he'll come tomorrow. Clearly, he won't come in the middle of the night. Who travels through the desert in the middle of the night? It's not like his camel has headlights. It's not. If he didn't come today, he and his new bride will come tomorrow. It's got to be one or the other. That's what simple reason would tell us. So we had 5 of the 10 who settled for that simple reason, the false choice. If not today, it'll be tomorrow. But 5 of the 10 said, who knows? He might come anytime. We better be prepared. They were open to the possibility. So they brought extra batteries for their flashlights. And midnight hits and someone notices a commotion and calls out, he's coming. And these 10 young 6th and 7th grade girls perk up and come awake in the middle of their desert slumber party and go, whoa. And suddenly they're fumbling around and they're confused in the darkness and they're tired and they're excited and they can't find any extra oil. And the first 5 get a little catty and say, go get some from the merchants. Like the merchants are open at midnight, And they're so they go off to try to find some. And of course, while they're gone, who shows up? For the Jews listening to this story at the time, it would have actually been quite humorous. It's a funny story. They waited, these silly girls They waited all day, all night for this moment, and they missed it because they were so closed-minded. They hadn't opened their minds to the possibility he could come at any time. They assumed he would only come when they expected. The message for us is quite clear. How often has Christ himself walked down the road right toward us, and we missed it because it's not what we expected? We have in our minds a notion, an expectation of when we think Jesus will show up. Well, he'll show up in Eucharist. We expect that. He'll show up after we die, hopefully. We expect that. But Jesus is telling us, it's not just when you expect, it's any time. And the wise person has the openness of St. Teresa of Calcutta, who says and sees Christ coming to her in the homeless and the hungry children. And the wise person has the openness of mind of St. Francis, who sees Christ coming to us in all of creation. And the wise person has the openness of mind of St. Benedict, who sees Christ coming to us in the stranger who knocks on the door. Or the openness of St. Teresa of Avila, who says, Christ comes to us in the mystery of experience. Or the openness of Pope Pope Francis, who says, Christ comes to us in the immigrant and the refugee. Or the openness of Jesus himself, who says, Christ is with us in the least among us. The leper, the widow, the Samaritan woman, where we least expect. Wisdom tells us to open our hearts, open our minds to the possibility. The foolish within us says, just look for him where we expect to find him. But the wise are open to Christ in anyone and everyone, at any time and every time.